cloud. All right, so now we're recording. As I mentioned, I'm spotlighting my video. So hopefully it's only my videos that will be recorded. And if you speak, it should be only your voice. But sometimes the thing strips up and your video will be recorded, but your name won't be on it. And the reason why we record this is we whack it onto YouTube for everybody else to enjoy. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
If you're a bit conscious about this, just switch off your video and then there's no chance of it being recorded. But hey,
Nikita, I think almost all of us are low on neuroticism, so it's okay with us.
Hey man, you might be just projecting. Yeah. No, people with interest in psychology tend to score higher on neuroticism. So you're either projecting or in denial or actually low on neuroticism. So there's some options there to play with. So today—
I believe him.
You believe him? Well,
yeah.
High on trust. And so basically what we have here, one moment, let me just close this little tabbity tab. Great. So what we have here is personality as part of development. Let me just admit a couple more people. So as you might know, this is a part of a program that we're running. So in workshop 1, we covered history. We try to compress 2,000 years of history of psychometrics into 1 hour. And you know what people remembered from this whole lecture? That there were 2 Cattels. Like, right. So next time I'll do this course, I'll just mention this. There's 2 Cattels, that's it. Let's go to the big 5. Then, yes, last week, we talked about personality in context. That it's not about just genetics or your environment or behavior. It's environment of different circumstances according to which your personality molds and how it manifests itself in behavior. So today we're going to actually say, okay, so if personality does change and it is a bit malleable, can we then work with it as professionals to help people develop their personalities and grow as individuals and all that good stuff? And next Thursday is going to be about relationships, which is going to be fun. By the way, feel free to invite your spouse or partner along and get a bottle of wine, especially if you're not driving. Should be quite an interesting discussion. By the way, I'm not liable for any divorces, children, or anything like that, which would be as a result of that workshop. Just getting myself covered there. High neuroticism and high openness, man. My mind comes up with all sorts of weird, wonderful. Anyways, and 3rd of December, we're keeping it open. Wait a second. Is next Thursday 3rd of December? Share. Right. So 10th of December, we're keeping things open. And as you can see, I am not high on attention to detail. Somehow my neuroticism does not translate on that. So what is the plan for today? So today is going to be the most practical session yet. The plan is quickly reflect on our journey so far and the previous lectures. Then we're actually just going to be talking about application of development. So how choose a psychometric, what the dangers, what the possibilities. And because there's a lovely number of 50 on you on the call last time I checked, we have a lot of, actually 58 now. We have a lot of experience we can build on. By the way, because there's 58 of you, as we usually do, if you want to connect with your fellow psychometric aficionado, because you have one thing in common, you actually sacrifice 1.5 hours of your precious time to look at slides on psychometrics. So that's already a self-selecting sample. You have something in common with the other 57 people on this call. So you can pop your name down into the chat and then you can just connect with each other on LinkedIn. So just feel free to do that and build up your network, and you never know what might happen. And then we have takeaways. Right. So if you can go to menti.com and type in 70, 60, 70, 0, and just type in, if you were here on your previous our previous lecture, just type in what stood out for you or what you remember about personality and context. Or you watched the YouTube recording of it as well. We have one reply straight off the bat, and I hope it's not 2 Cattels. Plasticity of personality. Yes, it wasn't 2 Cattels. Yeah, because there is a degree of plasticity. Anything else? I swear the only thing Zoom misses is elevator music or countdown music. That would also be good. Is it not nature and nurture? It's nature and nurture. Absolutely. We focus very much on the environment and personality seems to be less important. Yeah, sometimes it is. Because let's say all these small correlations between personality and performance, like 0.4, 0.5. So on a good day, we explain 16 to 25% of variance when it comes to performance as a result of personality. To me, it's not necessarily a criticism of psychometric assessments. To me, it's more of a homage to the adaptability of the human. Because we can adapt to all sorts of environment. Just think of how long you stayed in the previous job you hated. Anyways, but that's a different subject, and that can descend into dark places quick. Extroversion goes down after 50. Yep, in some people, especially men, that can happen. The quantum shift, so that period of time where you can really change your personality, as we had wonderful Tanya on our previous call as a career coach. When people move countries, there's a small window, as she mentioned, when people can change their personality. But be surprised how quickly it might close because of the habits we form. Retirement increases openness and agreeableness, but don't wait for it because you can be nice and curious even before you retire. Funny that. Therapy increases extroversion. Absolutely. It also decreases neuroticism. So it decreases negative emotional affect and picks up positive emotional affect. Who knew? Still on lecture 1. Oh, yes. There's actually a reason for this. It's basically a guy called Timothy Leary created the psychometric in the 50s and went on a whole drug binge, got busted with illicit substances, put it this way, got sentenced guilty. But in that state, they were administering a psychometric to understand what threat to society you were, to see what prison you go to. And he got administered his own test. So he played it and got sent to the most lowest security prison, from which he then organized an escape with the help of the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground to South America. Successfully, might I add. And yeah, so how's that for social desirability bias? And there's also cognitive affective. What do you consciously manage about your personality at work? Yep, and this is just one of the questions to ask. And talking about questions to ask, just a little bit about you. So I'm just curious to know about this. 58 people on the call here. Do you use psychometrics as part of coaching? Yep. Have you been coached with psychometrics as part of coaching? Or combining coaching and psychometrics is an alien subject to you? All right. By the way, if you already answered, if you can just unmute yourself and just share with us your experience of either being coached or having to coach people with psychometrics. What's been your experience? Yes, Joanna.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, hi.
Sorry. I've had both. I coach with and have been coached using a quite comprehensive 6-hour assessment. There was no hiding after that. Not that I would try to. I find as coaching with it, it is a good talking point, starting point. It gives someone an allegedly impartial, unbiased perspective, but because it's self-reporting, obviously it's their perspective of themselves. But I find that it's a useful starting point and a validation tool with them as to, is this how you see yourself? How do you see this play out? Where does this person or version of you appear under what context?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And when being coached with it, what was your general impression of it?
Exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 6-hour assessment, one of those fully loaded, or the ticker box, and then obviously the interviews, literally go, tell me about your childhood. I found the report that came out after it, for the depth, the time they took and the layers they went through to get the data, I felt the report that came out of it seemed quite surface, quite superficial.
So what did it say? Like, she doesn't want to talk about her childhood?
Well, no, I actually gave it all. It's like, where was the time I mentioned this? And where was the time I mentioned that? That showed I was a good person.
I know. So many questions, so many hours, and quite surface as a result of it.
So it felt that, but I got the job. So is that the intended outcome? Don't know.
Success. So you got a job with your report. So at least that makes the shallowness, offsets the shallowness of the report.
Clearly I was the face that fitted what they wanted.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Joanna. Would anybody else like to share their experience of either being coached or with psychometrics or coaching with psychometrics?
Martin here, Nikita. Hi.
Hey, Martin.
Working as a coach with it, I don't know which portion of cases or coachees where I think it's wonderful. We get off to a kind of a profile-focused coaching journey that enriches and deepens and goes forward. Let's call it a third. Then there's a third who, you know, almost dismiss, reject, and it's caused more harm than good, and we just have to leave it aside and work as if it never happened. Maybe that's even another third, and maybe that says more about me than them, I'm not sure. And then there's the piece in the middle where it informs us as a self-awareness instrument. That's my favorite way to use it, that the enhancement of self-awareness, but on its own without awareness of impact on others. I feel there's a bridge to be filled there, which is where the 360 work, of course, helps too.
Excellent. So it's also a standard distribution as far as how people take to it.
Maybe. Maybe.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Martin, about enhancing that self-awareness. Would anybody else like to chip in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, first of all, hi. I find constant amazement from people about the accuracy. You know, and you say, well, it's only what you put in, you'll get him back again. And it sort of makes you look really good as a coach, actually, when you decipher these things. But I like to take the approach with people that it's not necessarily so much about your personality, it's about appreciating the other personalities. So, you know, whatever tool you're using, there's the others. And it's about that distinction between, you know, those people aren't wrong, they're just different. That can be really helpful and powerful.
Exactly. And they're not doing that just to annoy you, can also be very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and couldn't agree more with you, Alex, because when the psychometric arrives, you know, it usually comes on a piece of A4 with borders. Then it has borders around the page. And therefore it gives you an illusion like it exists in isolation, but really nothing could be further from the truth. It exists with nature, nurture, but also your environment and relationships around you. And it impacts how you perceive others. And to me, the most curious question is if you have an extreme trait, so let's say 95th percentile on something, so top 5% of the population, is how you perceive your opposite. I had one time a manager, extremely low neuroticism, like zilch, and extremely high extroversion. Quite a happy dude, you know. Oh, what is it? Ray of sunshine. But I asked him, how do you deal with your more emotional colleagues? Well, I said like more emotionally dynamic colleagues. And he goes, it's easy. If they come to me with their emotions, I tell them two things. Nobody died and they should grow up. And I said, well, what do you do if that doesn't work? I send them to HR. It all comes down to respect.
Perfect reply.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vijay?
I said like perfect way of dealing with people.
Yeah.
I send them to HR. Yeah. True.
I had a good one as well. It was an engineering firm, and one of the engineers, we were standing on qualities we want to develop as part of this workshop, and one was standing on empathy. And I was like, oh, interesting. Why do you stand on this? Because, well, it's about emotions in other people. And I go, okay, you know, I have an office, and sometimes people come to me with their emotions. I was like, all right, what do you want to achieve as part of this workshop? I want to figure out how can I help them to leave those emotions at the door when they enter my office. And he was not joking. It was fully serious. And I think we're going back to that previous discussion we had about culture and selection, is that if you select for a particular personality preference, and as Stuart was mentioning about this transport company, which will rename nameless, is that if you select for particular personality traits, they'll get confirmation bias and they will start losing respect for diversity of perspective and personality because they have so many confirmations from around them. But we'll definitely get on that, especially in the next lecture on relationships. But it's great to have that. We have 15 people who are coaching, have been coached, and some people who are wondering about this. So on the next slide, what we'll talk about is why we might want to use personality assessments as part of coaching. So if you go back to Menti and type it in. So what are your suggestions? What would be the benefit? We already had increases self-awareness. We already had, like, starts a conversation. But I'm just curious to hear a bit more options. So why we might want to use it. And while people are typing, feel free to unmute yourself and just share with us. Otherwise, we're just going to keep looking at me for 3 minutes in silence. I mean, I don't mind that.
I use it to find out how I'm different to my coachee and to alter my style when I'm dealing with that person.
Can you give us an example?
If I was to, let's say, be dealing with somebody who is a lot more introverted than me, I'm a very highly extroverted person, then I would make sure that I would send information in advance. For example, I was speaking to a new coachee yesterday, and I was giving her an overview, in fact, of Lumina, and I asked her just a general question about where does she see her career going over the next few years. And she said, I have to think about that. You'll have to give me some time. Perhaps we can book in another meeting. So she wanted time to reflect. So this was even before she'd been through her Lumina. I'm getting an inkling as to what her style is and how I need to approach her in the future.
Excellent. Yeah, as a really high extrovert, I just remember when I'm working with somebody highly introverted, that just because it's silent, the line did not die. Because they're just silence. And I make sure to count to 20 inside my head. And allow for this pauses to happen. Because sometimes you just want to go, hello, is anybody there?
Yeah, that's a big thing, especially if the coach is extroverted and the coachee is introverted. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, like if I need to coach.
A reflective silence is interpreted as end of the sentence.
Or better yet, rejection. Yeah, it's fun. If I have to like work with 3 introverts in a day, I feel exhausted by the end of it. But if I need to work with 3 creative extroverts, man, I'm just like on top of the world at the end of the day. It's like, where are people like me? Brilliant. I'll just tell you exactly what I tell myself and I see what sticks. So, wonderful. We have quite a few different perspectives as well. Get the individual to really think about who they are and how this might impact others and their development. Self-awareness.
Nikita,
yes.
Sorry, I was going to ask, it's really interesting when I listen to hear who steps in and who doesn't when you're asking a lot of these questions. Have you thought about sending out any questions on Menti to figure out what sort of introvert extrovert group that sort of comes to your sessions each week? Because it seems like everybody seems very interested. You've got over 50 people participating, but it seems like people responding seems to be at such a lower rate in terms of using their voices. And I was just sort of curious to see, are these kind of situations or these workshops really attracting a lot of more introverted people, or are you just got a lot of quiet extroverts?
Well, let's do a very dead simple psychometric. But it's a very good question, Emily. So what we can do is let's create a slide. This is the beauty of Mentimeter. Let's do a bar chart so we can see. So then we can say,
and that's the reaction of an open and extroverted person.
And low conscientiousness.
He did not say, okay, let me think how we can actually implement it. And let me come back to you in maybe next session or maybe next to next session.
You describe yourself more with, damn it, spelling. Like, right? Let's bounce. Would you describe yourself more as an extrovert, ambivert, or introvert? Whoa, right. Huh? Introversion catching up. Ooh, standard distribution. Oh, cheeky. Oh, this is pretty good. Come on.
Speed polling, your new favorite.
Yeah, man. It's like extroversion, openness, and like took 2 seconds to create a slide. It's like brilliant.
You're going to have to give the introverts a lot longer to think about it.
I know. And I better shut up as well, but that's about too much to ask. I only have half an hour of willpower and it's already out. So for the day. Right. So nice little distribution.
Yeah.
Stella, it looks like there's 2 people on the call. So
Yeah.
one is introverted and the other one is extrovert.
Yeah, he is.
Which one?
Yeah, I am a high introvert. So I actually love working with extroverts because they'd never notice that I haven't spoken for 5 minutes.
Yeah, and you're such a good listener. So then they can go, well, enough about me. What do you think about me? By the way, in couples, I find if there's this difference between introversion and extroversion, when you reflect on the day, it's better that the introvert goes first and then the extrovert. So just, oh yeah, and introversion is not sign of rejection of by an extrovert. So that's something also to learn over time. Because it's like, if you come back late from work after networking and the extrovert's been working from home, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna socialize, etc. Richie at the door is like, let's go out, let's have fun. And the introvert just goes, I just want to read a book and a glass of wine. And the extrovert tilts their heads like, and do we have a problem? And it's like, we don't have a problem. I just want a glass of wine and a book. It's like, oh, you're raising your voice. And it escalates. I don't know if it resonates. So yeah, so we have a standard distribution. And Emily, back to your point. So what are your thoughts on this?
It would be interesting because there's a lot of ambiverts in the call, and it's too bad that it's such a binary sort of yes, no, and ambivert kind of a graph, because I'd love to see a scale. But that's me and my strange thinking.
Well, this actually is a scale because we have like standard distribution across. And
True.
The key thing here is that we're all ambiverts. It's just what Carl Jung said. This is what people forget about his writing often, because he said there's no such thing as a pure introvert or a pure extrovert. We're all ambiverts. Well, that's a paraphrase. He said that an introvert or an extrovert belong in a mental institution, but that's a different story. Though I cannot find the direct quote, so it might be from Facebook. But when you do read his book on type, he gives a metaphor of a lion. And when the lion chases down its prey, it has both paws. The book is not in dramatic language, but hey, but basically the lion still hits either with the right paw or the left. So similarly, we're all ambiverts, but we sometimes hit with our extroverted paw or the introverted one. So we're all a bit of both. And the key thing is, it's not necessarily, when you ever run a workshop, you can't customize for everybody. But I think it's given different options. This is why I love Menti and using unmute. Yes, there will be a bias towards people who unmute themselves. But there's also the opportunity for people to answer with Menti. And as long as you acknowledge the answers given by different modalities, it's pretty much fine, in my experience, as long as we give different modes of expression and a bit of pauses. But yeah, usually it's on a call of 50 people, 5 people will do 80% of the talking. Any other thoughts or reflections on introversion, extroversion?
One, at the risk of being too extroverted, it's Martin again. I'm a little bit tired of the binary, and I'm even tired of the ambivert, but that's maybe the mood I'm in. And switching it more into what's energizing people. I know that's an old MBTI question, but where is the will available? Where is the appetite? Where is the passion? Why are people answering or not answering? But maybe that's deeper layers of personality, and also bringing in much wider context. Maybe people have kids in the background, God knows what. So I think I need that to bring energy to me, other than what the graph is bringing us and what a binary question can bring us.
So that's the kind of openness and curiosity, wanting the 3-dimensional or 5th-dimensional. But on that note, what are the dangers of using psychometrics as part of coaching?
The biggest danger, which I can say from my experience, is like people look for some kind of confirmation. And once you tell them this is what they are, or once they see it is written in the report, some graph, some number, they kind of try to confirm to it. So yeah, we call it like self-fulfilling prophecy. And that, I think, is the biggest danger.
Self-fulfilling prophecy combined with confirmation bias is a vicious combination.
Yeah.
And also numbers, man. This is like, is it? I want to say Roy Childs, that's one of the psychometricians in UK. He uses this term soft numbers. So when psychometrics present themselves, we feel it's like a weight, it's something like a measurement, something standardized. But actually, when we talk about psychometrics, we talk about squishy numbers. And I think this is quite correct because, for example, even when we deal with things like measurement error, this is why we say, you know, we don't say you're above average if you score 81st percentile. We say you're one average if you score over 86th percentile in order to compensate for measurement error. So therefore, it's an illusion, I think, because we deal so often with measurements which are exact, such as weight and length. But when we come to psychometrics, we apply the same kind of gravitas to the numbers that we see in front of us when they're actually much more squishy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, true.
Any other dangers? Oh, somebody noticed the typo in this question. Nice. Labeling on account of what person is, to have wrong direction, gives wrong bias. Negative personality traits, this whole kind of judgment of good and bad.
Someone wrote co-catching. What is that?
Because it's a typo in the question here.
Ah. Oh, okay, okay. I did not notice that, which is in bold. I noticed in the comment, which is small.
Maybe that question mark attracted you. So, any other thoughts or reflections?
Always comes down to what is your intent in using a psychometric assessment? You know, if a psychometric assessment is the answer, what's the question? What are you looking for? And often, I know as a HR person previously, but also someone who's been accredited in various psychometric tools, it always comes down to, well, we want to eliminate the bias and the gut instinct because we find the gut instinct is inconsistent. It's harder for us to justify a decision based on, oh, we just felt it was X. So they feel that it's some sort of impartial evidence-based tool. But we also know that that's how it's applied is where that plays out, not necessarily the tool itself is evidence-based. It's a piece of evidence. It's not the evidence that may determine the decision or outcome to hire or whatever you're using it for.
Yeah, why are you using it? What's the job spec? What are we actually looking for? Did Jim leave work and now we're looking for another Jim? You know, so there's always that a little bit digging a little bit deeper. So, and especially in development. So what can we do? So what we will cover today for the next 45 minutes, well, more like an hour, is some steps you can do to minimize the dangers. You can never get rid of them, same as you can never get rid of bias in selection, in my opinion. It's always there, but you need to be aware of it. So choosing the assessment, building the psychological contract, interpreting the data, and exploring the results with the client and identifying next steps. Now, this is all about development. Selection is slightly a different ballpark. But if anybody has any questions about selection, we can see if we can harness collective intelligence to answer them. So going back to Joanna's point, as far as after we select why use psychometrics, what do we consider when choosing the assessment? because assessments, man, it's like a candy store. There's so many different colors, names, acronyms, numbers.
Well, I look for 3 indicators: validity, validity, and validity.
I see. What sort of validity are we talking about? Face validity? Or are we talking criterion validity? Or lately I asked the client, what assessments do you use? And it says, we use gamified assessments. And I said, why? Because they're sexy. So apparently sexy is now validity as well. It's like a face validity on steroids, I take it.
Yeah.
Vijay, what validity do you use?
Like I prefer, like, it has to be content valid, in the sense that it should actually, content wise, it should be measuring what it claims to measure. And second thing I look at, it has to be very high on construct, like whatever is the interrelationship of different dimensions and all assumed to should be there, it has to be there. It has to have demonstrated that. And then third thing is cultural sensitivity, which I take a part of a construct validity only.
Can you say a little bit more about cultural sensitivity, please?
Like, there are multiple assessments I have gone through, like they ask questions which do not simply exist in another culture. Not that the dimension does not exist. For example, extroversion exists everywhere, but pubs do not exist everywhere. And many people find it very surprising that, okay, you don't have a bar. There are cities without any bar. So if you have a question which says that, you know, any question which is in context of a bar or a pub, or sometimes you don't have museum in every city, or many people don't know what a museum is, or they don't connect to museum because they are not kind of brought up in that kind of culture where museums are prevalent. So look at that, like questions, the way they are asked, they should be meaningful to people, like they should connect to people. So this is what I mean by cultural sensitivity.
Yeah, look at the items. And so often people don't look at the items of the questionnaire. And that's what surprised me as a practitioner. Like, surely you need to know the items which you ask your clients. And there are some psychometric items can get really weird. I once had an item, a colleague shared, we had a competition, what the weirdest item you encountered in your profession. I know it gets really sad when we're in a pub having pints, that's what we talk about. But hey, and his one takes a biscuit. It was, I'm suspicious of women who wear rouge. It was an actual psychometric item. He was administered as part of selection. And they couldn't answer to him what it was supposed to measure, something about sociability. So yeah, user-friendliness, purpose of use, bias, psychometric properties, wonderful. Applicability for the client. Is it valid? Does it translate to the real world? Cultural bias. What is it which requires an assessment? Do you really need it? Validity, fit for purpose, all of those things are fantastic. And also job role analysis. And also for coaching, I would say as well, we need to identify what are we trying to solve or address as part of this. And, you know, the code word strong personalities or increased soft skills, there's definitely something behind there. So here's the questions I usually ask. So building one, do you actually need it? Some people use psychometrics sometimes. Well, we used a tool last year. Let's use the tool again without actually saying what's the benefit of this. And the key thing is that it might not look like much, but let's say if you have 50 people on the program and it takes 30 minutes to complete a psychometric, you're wasting 25 people of busy people's lives to do this. So it needs to be a good return on investment. Or as Joanna mentioned, 6 hours. And what are you getting? And if like psychometrics is a conversation starter, I always recommend just start the conversation with, how would you describe your personality? That usually works. And it gives more freedom. And then you can ask, you know, what personality do you manage? And you can have a very good conversation about personality just based on that. Or even if people find it hard to describe themselves, that's also something to talk about. So ask yourself, is there a way we can not use a psychometric? Play devil's advocate with yourself. As somebody who's really obsessed with psychometrics, that's a really hard thing to do, but it is possible. How much freedom do you have in choosing an assessment? Because let's say a client uses a tool you disagree with and you're a freelancer, really? How much choice do you have if you want the work? So understand why they use this tool, what's the, let's say, the boundaries and how much weight they assign to it, and slowly start giving them an experience of a different product. I always found it's better to show something better than criticize what they use. People don't like to be criticized for the tools they use. But if you show them something better, they might have not known it, so it can't be that good. Quite often when I show people a tool that I use, their reflection is, I didn't know a psychometric could do this. So rather than focusing on a criticism of a product which they use, show them something better. I find that attracts more people. And like say, what are you getting from this tool, etc. Because people are so quick to get on a high horse and go, you're using this tool? How dare you? Don't you know? And actually, they don't care, usually. And nobody likes to look bad. So what are you trying to measure? Specify objectives with the client. So actually, what are we going to get out of this? When was the psychometric items last updated? And a very important thing to look out for, and I know it might sound anecdotal, but is the author's name still on the product? That I'm always even more inquisitive about the items if the author is still alive and or their name is on the product, or both, and how much weight do they have? Because often, you know, you criticize an item, it's like, why is this during the training in psychometric? And they go, because the author likes it. And you go, okay. Oh, Vijay,
Yeah.
I noticed you unmuted yourself. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, like I totally agree with that, this part. I agree with all of them, but this one is very important to check when it was last updated.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens that many times we are, carrying the graveyard of psychometrics.
Oh, nice.
There are things, there are theories, there are models which are no more existing in the reality. Like they are not good enough now to predict the reality of today. But we are using that, and then companies who market them or sell them, they sell them with the logic that 100 years of research into that. And for last 100 years, what they are doing is replicating the same thing which was done 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So this update is very important. And that I felt a lot in the personality type instruments. It was crazy.
Yeah. And to me, for example, I was also like you, very critical of some models of psychometrics. But recently I discovered it's trait and type. Type is really good for describing those extreme introverts or extroverts. Trait is really good for the ambivert description. But both of them are actually both applicable. So I say psychometrics, it's trait to type. And let's say most of us will have all of, let's say the big five is trait, but then we might have one type. So we'll have like 4 average and then 1 really high. Yeah. And I'm really interested if there's any research that we can see how people are defined. Because let's say if you sit down for a coachee and you ask, what psychometrics used before? And they go, oh, I complete the type-based tool. And my quick question is, which letters do you remember? And when, let's say, if somebody is 95th percentile extrovert, they'll say, well, I'm an E. And I go, that's really interesting. They might remember their 2 highest qualities, but let's say if they're average on agreeableness, they're the types that map onto this, they usually can't remember. And this is yet very anecdotal for me, but I would love to know if there's any research on actually what letters we remember based on your strengths of your preference. Because I think it's a double whammy, because not only you identify with the strongest, and we know from research that if you start with your highest preference in the narrative report, people are more likely to read it. So the more salient part. But I think it's also what makes you stand out from the crowd, this highest trait. Because the 95th percentile extrovert stands out from anywhere they go. In most places, they're the most extroverted one. So not only they strongly identify with that, but other people identify them strongly with that trait. I don't know, just anecdotal. But it's amazing. And some of this type-based tool, yes, it's questionable, but their narratives are really good.
Oh, yes.
You can really resonate with that.
Amazing, yeah.
And if they can identify, it makes their life 5% easier based on this, so be it. And yeah, I don't have such a, if you're interested in the trait and type debate, we had Richard Owen present not so long ago about this. So if you go trait and type into YouTube and type in Richard Owen, you will find a video of him actually marrying the 2 up. And he basically says that, type comes from this kind of very, oh, damn. what's an approach when one's statistical and one is like more looking at the world around you?
Psychodynamic? No.
Close, but slipped my mind. But basically, watch Richard's talk. He says it much more eloquently than me. Yeah, but I argued with Richard a lot before I saw his point. So much beer was spilled. And also, how much does it cost money and time compared to useful information? This is one of the key things that I feel practitioners take for granted after I've worked for 3 psychometric publishers. And this is this item in particular. What support can the publishers provide? Because publishers can usually provide a lot of support. You're paying them good money to use their assessment. And quite often people just don't call the publisher. Like they have a question about the tool, like what the hell this means. Pick up the phone, call a publisher and say, I want a second pair of eyes on this report. Like, what does this mean? And the publisher should be able to provide you with this. If you're ever assessing somebody with dyslexia or vision impairments or what have you, in order to make reasonable adjustments, which you should, call the publisher and ask them. But please don't do this 20 minutes before the assessment. Like I had one time an ability assessment. It's like, we have somebody dyslexic coming in. I was like, how much time do you have? Half an hour? And I was like, so just please give a bit more time for the publisher to respond. But it's there is, they should support you. And it's always good to have a few tools in your toolkit. So I'm qualified. I probably use one psychometric 80% of the time, but I also recently got qualified in another, and I'm planning to qualify in another in order to keep your periphery vision. Look at different tools and always haggle on the price. Hopefully not too many psychometric owners are on this call, but always haggle on the price. Because, hey, even if they say no movement, at least you tried. So, all right.
I just wanted to make a point you were saying about the publishers, and they should provide you with support. I worked a lot with a test publisher, had quite a complicated tool, and I remember calling up and saying, I just want to run through some of the conclusions that I've made, and they said that I would have to pay a consultancy fee to the consultants at the test house for them to go through it with me. So, it does depend. And they're quite a well-known company.
Are you still using their product?
No.
Well, see that they lost out. Yeah, Martin, it seems like that resonated with you. Would you like to tell us why? No comment, I see. And yeah. But ask, and then you can make your own judgments whether you want to continue working with them or not. But I believe that the publisher should be supporting you and giving you a second opinion. So you picked your assessment, and now you're sending it out to your client. You're putting that email together, inviting them to complete. What was the worst invitation you ever saw to complete a psychometric or heard about? Like, just do it and your job depends on it? Or, if you want this job, you better do this. No terrible ones yet. That's optimistic. Or maybe the industry is getting its act together.
Or maybe one just expects them to be terrible, so it's not really a surprise, so it's not a standout.
Always all about the norm group, isn't it? Nothing terrible. Wow. Lengthy email, 10 minutes to read. Perhaps a complete lack of invitation because they're still just using interviews. That we had to attend team buildings. Do this for homework. Yeah, it sounds innocent, but it isn't. Would anybody like to share their experiences? Just feel free to unmute yourself. No right or wrong answers written in bold and capitals. If that's a mixed message I've ever seen.
That was funny. Like, and I saw that and I asked them, like, why do you capitalize and why do you put it in bold? We wanted to emphasize that there is no right and wrong answer. People should be honest. So I asked them, like, but if you highlight this, what people will think about it? Just as a receiver, if I receive it and you tell me that, oh, there is nothing wrong in it, jump there, nothing wrong, nothing will happen, jump. Even if, it creates even more suspicion, especially for people who are high on vigilance, people who are low on factor N of 16 PF. For them, it's a big problem.
Yes, and I don't blame them at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's on no invitation. Had the feedback literally involved the statistics and graphs. I contacted the company. It turned out it was a mistake, but they never committed to a feedback session. Really, that's fascinating. So the feedback, just you will present it with graphs. Short notice as well. And see, to me, this is one of the linchpins, which is often gets missed, because quite often people spend so much time selecting the assessment, but no time building rapport with the client. And this is because this is self-report. The data is only as good as the people that put in the data. And if these people don't trust you, you're going to get crap data and you get a crap result. Doesn't matter the quality of the psychometric you chose. So therefore, building this rapport is key. So let's say, for example, I worked with an engineering company and we had 150 engineers. So I kind of mused lyrically on what we're going to do in the tools. And they go, well, Nikita, the problem is it's not the tool. Nobody's going to do this. I go, all right. Why not? Because last time nobody did it. I was like, what did you do? Well, we just told them to do it. Okay. So we talked about neuroticism and vigilance, and that, 16% are going to be really suspicious. If we don't nip it in the bud and address this, it's going to spread. So what we did, we had a webinar ahead of the sending out invitation. We said, the psychometric is coming out. If you have any questions, let us know. And we had a webinar where people were able to raise these questions. Of course, is the data going to be sold? That was a question. Who's going to see it, etc. So we're able to address all of this in one call. And we had several calls to go through portraits afterwards as well. And we had a very nicely worded email. We also had the head team complete the psychometric before, share their experiences. So only after a webinar, after the lead team shared what they got from this and their experiences, some lead team actually chose to share their portraits. And after this, we had 50% completion within 24 hours, and we had 100% completion within 72 hours of all the assessments. Because it's this prep and building rapport, which is just so essential, which is so often missed. And when given short notice, or be yourself, or do the homework, rather than writing a transparent email, short, why are you doing this, what the benefit, what you're going to get, how it's going to be used, who's going to see it, kind of thing. Nice, short, and any questions, direct contact, or even providing a venue to ask questions. Considering there was no bad invitations, does anybody want to share like the best experience they had of being asked to complete a psychometric? No worse, no bad. No, standard distribution. A little bit. So, things to remember. Also, let me just turn on the light. Maybe my camera will flicker less. So what was the delegate been told before, if anything? So sometimes as a coach, I was brought in, you sit down with the client, you have their psychometric, and the client sits down opposite you and he goes, so did I do something bad? Why am I here? It's like, no, you're in like a high performance program. Weren't you told? It's like, nope. I said, turn up and meet this girl. And you turn out to be a guy. And I was like, nice start. And then I talked to HR. It's like, weren't they told? I was like, we told their leaders to tell them what this is about. And I'm like, yeah, right. Like that's going to happen with the busy schedules. Their leaders and managers explaining that you've been asked to do psychometric coaching. Being as transparent as possible, as soon as possible. That's also important, rather than saying, oh, we tell them on the day. Allowing the delegates to ask questions and why we collect in the data and how we will use it. Would anybody like to add anything else to the list of what we might consider while building that lovely psychological contract?
Like ask them if they have gone through any kind of self-report based assessment before, because many a times I've seen that their previous experience of going through different assessment, it comes into the way of further learning or exploring, especially.
Absolutely, because it's not about you. Sometimes a client can be really defensive the moment you enter the room, and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with their previous experience. My favorite example is I'm sitting down with a client. They're really defensive, like, you know, and I'm just asking, what was your previous experience? It's like, well, I completed the psychometric before, you know, it was a type-based tool, but you know what? And I was like, so what was your experience of it? And it's like, well, you know, the consultant, they told me something. I was like, okay. So they sat down with me, and the first thing they told me, you lied on your assessment. First thing. And I said, did they say why? And it's like, of course, this is what I asked. Like, why do you say this? Because the only way you got this results if both of your parents loved you unconditionally as a child. This is literally what the consultant said on the back of a psychometric. First thing to open up a conversation. This was not an icebreaker. It was an ice maker, as Rainer Kurtz sometimes says when he opens up a conference.
It's crusher.
I know, it's like, but it's completely out of your control. But if you don't ask that question, you would not necessarily look under the bonnet or why they're so opinionated about this. Does anybody else have any horror stories that clients went through?
When someone has briefed the wrong report and don't realize that it's the wrong, sorry, that's jumped to the briefing. It's not the setting up.
That's still really fun. Oh, Nina?
I was just going to say it was about a report when Richard, my husband, had some feedback, and the printed report was referring to him as she all the way through it instead of he. So, and they never put it right. Just shows a lack of professionalism.
Yeah, that's also an interesting one.
I can tell you this is just a clerical mistake. Because
I know it's a clerical mistake, but
it happened once with one of my clients, because I develop psychometric tests, so I have a psychometric testing company, and what happened is that the gender was entered wrong, so it was written Mr. something, and the gender was entered as female, so the computer thought it's female and it put all the female comments, and then the client came to me and saying that, look, it was actually my partner who came to me that, Vijay, look how this system is referring to this guy as female, and it's like a shame for me and all that. And then I started exploring. So first thing was to check is that if the gender is entered properly into the system. And then it was wrong. So we just changed it, got the report, and then sent it again. Nice. So sometimes it could be just a clerical mistake.
Yeah, but you made it right. And in Nina's case, well, her husband's case, it wasn't made right. And that's what's a real kind of a bummer here. And, but yeah, you can tell your partners that I feel his pain. Me too, I have also been referred to as female in numerous occasions and in different reports. So I know.
Nikita, by the way, Nikita is very much Indian female name.
Yeah, everywhere. I am aware of that. It's pretty much female everywhere apart from Russia. Like in Russia, they thought, let's just stick it to the rest, to the West. Let's just use Nikita as a male name, as a version of Cold War. I don't know what happened. It's just, I guess it all started with Nikita Khrushchev. I blame his parents for this. But anyways, that's digressing. So you selected the psychometric. You sent it out with the best email possible to build that psychological contract, and you got this report. So in Nina's partner's case, he noticed that it was referring to him as a she. But what stands out for you as a practitioner, you got this juicy psychometric report hot off the digital press. The ink still, well, actually, who uses ink nowadays? It's all digital. So, okay, your laptop is still warm. And what do you look for in the report? Summary. Find that thing I strongly identify with. Nice. Extreme scores. Straight to neuroticism or something similar. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about what's similar to neuroticism? So everybody kind of goes to the summary, the outliers, the graphs first, if it confirms my assumptions. Nice.
I see a mix of response here. Some people are responding from the perspective of what they see when they see their report. And some people are responding from the perspective of what they see when they see a client report.
Oh, brilliant observation indeed. This is quite curious. I mean, yeah. But it's interesting, everybody looks for summary or response to feedback that's socially desirable as an assessor overall fit for the role. Nice. Would anybody like to unmute and just share with us why they wrote down what they wrote down, or what's standing out for them from the data they see in front of us?
I like the graphs first because I can always see quickly then what sticks out the most. Is there one way above the others or way out of the side?
Mm-hmm. I see. So it's just that extremes, the outliers.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I was going to say, I suppose it fits with the point that a lady made earlier, which is kind of the reason. First of all, you think about the reason why you've commissioned the report in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it does very much consider the answer that you're looking for in the report. So it depends where you're going to go, but very much I agree with what people are saying. I would look at the summary and then go into the report really for the reason that I've commissioned the report. But I very much like the point that someone's made there about emotional stability and about how someone's going to respond to the feedback, because inevitably there's going to be potentially something in that report that the individual might not like. So in my mind, I'm always considering how someone's going to respond to the feedback I'm going to give them. Mm-hmm. And you can never assume that you're going to know with confidence, if it's someone you've not met before, how they're going to respond to that. So that's also in my mind as well.
Yeah, or for example, if they're highly agreeable and low neurotic and high neurotic and potentially a bit conflict averse. So how you can kind of, they're more likely to kind of confer with what you're saying. Mm. So it's also something to watch out for.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kelly. Anybody?
You're welcome.
Yes, Martin. I just noted you unmuted yourself.
Sorry.
That's okay. Right, so there's definitely a few things to look out for. So extreme percentiles, low and above. And going back to the previous point about respect of your opposite, ask how you relate to somebody opposite to you. Or better yet, who do you rely to bring this to you? Let's say I'm rubbish at attention to detail. So how do I turn to for attention to detail? Or if I need the bigger picture, who do I go to? Because basically no man or woman is an island. And I think that over years, if you work together, you develop a symbiotic relationship. If you have opposite personalities, you become to rely on each other for different things. So let's say if one person is highly organized, one is disorganized. I don't need to be trying to be more organized because somebody's got my back. And sometimes very opposite personalities can develop a symbiotic relationship. And the longer they're with together, the more they polarize. And this can come to a very nasty surprise when one of them moves jobs. And let's say they've been headhunting and they've been a stellar performance in the previous place. And now they're in a new place and they do exactly the same as they always did in the previous place, but now it's not getting the results. And then when you look at their profile, it's very one-sided. So what I usually do is like, who were you working with in the past? Who was your number two in the previous place? And can you quickly draw them for me? Using a little app I use to draw a personality. And then usually it's the opposite. And then overlay them. It's like, well, together you make a complete person. But the other side is completely not covered right now. And especially if they're in a senior position, especially if they've been brought in with a lot of hoo-ha and this person is fantastic, look how he was at the competitor. It doesn't necessarily make it such a great place to ask for help. So then we can create a little plan of how they can reach out and start building on that. But it is that symbiotic relationship. And it does come across in, let's say, I find this in marriage and close working relationships. We kind of change each other's personality by working closely or living closely together. So it's just something to keep in mind. Average scores are also important, because if you ask somebody on average extroversion, so ambiversion, it depends when they're more extroverted or introverted. So when you say it depends, and you go, on what? Now, what it depends on? When it doesn't depend, when it's one way or the other. So also inquiring a little bit about it. Patterns between factors, such as an extroverted high neurotic, is very different from an extroverted low neurotic. And all of the factors are interconnected, because when we look at correlations between factors of personality, we rarely find a zero, like almost never, because it's all connected. It's like an intertwined. All of them, all this neuroticism, extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, all the facets, the big two, big one, it's all just this rich intertwined system, which one needs to learn how to navigate. And appreciating that somebody's 95th percentile on extroversion is very different from somebody else's 95th percentile on extroversion. Statistical anomalies. So what I mean by this, talking about correlations, such as if you're highly extrovert, is negatively loaded with neuroticism. So it's very unlikely you'll find one high on both, because they're negatively loaded, so they push each other away. But if you find somebody high on both, that's interesting, because it's not what you usually encounter. Or if you use a bimodal Big Five measurement, if you find somebody both high on openness and low on openness, so down to earth, it's also an anomaly. And lots of strong and low preferences. So the question is, if you have a lot of extreme scores, so a lot of lows and highs, how do people deal with more people in the middle on average? Because sometimes when it's not right, I find that people who score a lot on average traits see people who score extreme, so not as adaptable, as childish. And people who are on extreme preferences might see people who score average as vanilla. They don't stand for anything. So even this kind of meta preference is quite important to investigate. And again, this is all about, comes down to relationship with others. As Alex previously pointed out, and respect towards others. I always say, you can read dozens of books on performance, personality, but 80% come down to R-E-S-P-E-C-T, a song by Aretha Franklin. So if you don't respect your opposite, God help you. Because nobody can survive in this world alone. Right. So on this note, what are your favorite questions to ask in a coaching scenario? So just type them in, and feel free to unmute yourself and share as well. A bit of a reflective moment while I plug in my laptop, because with low conscientiousness, I forgot to do it. Oh. And I'm not using my personality as an excuse, or am I? So. Oh. Right. As a non-coach, what does this mean? That this coaching session was successful. Tell me something good about myself. Nice. What do you want to focus on today? What do you want to get from coaching? How does that resonate with you? Yes, absolutely, Dina. Feel free to contribute any questions that you fancy. What has helped you, for example, as a coaching question? Just get the door. How would you describe yourself? I'm just wondering, would anybody like to unmute themselves and tell me why do particularly they like this item of how would you describe yourself?
This is actually a very powerful question. How would you describe yourself?
Mhm.
And before having any feedback session on the test, I definitely ask this question: how would you describe yourself? Because it gives me quite good idea about how the person is looking at himself, and then look at the report, and it helps in establishing the rapport very quickly.
Absolutely. And I very much agree with you. I also started with that question because it also puts the impetus and puts the person in the driving seat as an expert on themselves,
Yep.
rather than
Yep.
seeing you in the
Yes.
position of power as a psychometrician telling them who they are, which might make you feel good, but not particularly productive for the coaching relationship.
Yeah.
And then you can compare how they actually see themselves to how they describe themselves in the assessment. How did you find completing the questionnaire, and what would you like to change, or what would you like to focus on, so people can set that intention? And thank you for that. Those are wonderful questions. So from my perspective, again, how would you describe your personality? What would you like us to cover in this session? Have you completed assessments before? What aspects of your personality you consciously manage at work, and why do you feel it's necessary to do so? And when did you not manage yourself as well as you wanted to? And how do you deal with your opposite? And for really qualities, who do you turn to this? So it's just kind of covering both self-awareness in the beginning, describing yourself, what you want to actually achieve with this as part of this session. And then also a little test about person to environment fit. This is what you manage about yourself. And how do you deal with your highly emotionally reactive colleagues is how do you deal with your opposite? So in relationship to others, and also who do you turn to? So that's kind of things that who do you go to help you with this? Would anybody like to add any more questions to the previous ones that we covered and this ones as well? Joanna, you seem pensive.
No, it's just reflecting on the questions being, it depends, I guess, on the intent of the coaching, whether it's driven by the individual receiving the coaching or by a manager or a third party. So if it's the individual, clearly it's around their goals and what they want from the session or to achieve or feel that they need to work on. If it's a third party, the question is around, I guess, probing their self-awareness. If you've been given a brief as a coach, as I was once, the individual had these behaviors that were becoming a bit career limiting, and they wanted it worked on. It's like, well, we need the coachee to agree with that plan rather than just be seen as used as a stick to hit them with, dressed up as coaching. This will help develop you. It was a transparency issue, I think.
Yes, but it does happen because it's another factor. It's like, why are you there? And is your role towards the individual or towards the wider organization? And that's also a choice to make.
Rob Breener, the professor of Org Psych at Queen Mary, posted on LinkedIn a month or so ago that something to the words to the effect of he didn't understand coaching really. He didn't think he'd ever need it, and he didn't really understand what it should achieve. And I think he quoted a phrase that it was some sort of unpaid counselling or unqualified counselling or something. And I found that quite interesting. Of course, it lit up the feed, and I think that was his intent, was to get discussion or debate going. But I'd be curious to see what, peers on the call think. If you know.
So it is how it's used and why, rather than dealing is very abstract. And this is sometimes happens is because coaching can mean anything. It can go from, let's say, counseling to psychotherapy, and is completely unregulated, and people don't necessarily know boundaries. And every individual coach has such a unique style, so you don't really know what you're getting under this overall umbrella term of coaching. And some people, coaching can be delivered by a psychologist of 30 years experience, and sometimes can be delivered by a person who attended a 3-day life coaching course. So the experience widely differs and how it's applied. So yeah, it's Wild West, but I wouldn't say it's, useless or whatever, or not unpaid counseling, because that's like, but hey, if I wanted to get a lit up feed on LinkedIn, that's exactly what I'd probably write. Any other thoughts on questions to ask or generally the session?
Well, if I give a feedback, I would always ask how the actual report, especially if you're using psychometrics, is how the personality report resonates with them. Because at the end of the day, they are owning their own personality. And I asked them about, give me an example when you demonstrated that trait, or give me an example when you demonstrated the opposite, and see actually what they feel more comfortable with and how they perceive themselves and their own story.
Absolutely. And or when I'm feeding back and people say, oh, this is interesting, I say, what's particularly interesting about it? Or that was useful, how it's useful. Or if you say like, oh, and they go, it really hit the spot, you say, can you just play it back to me in your own words, just to make sure that it's kind of going through and being processed. And at the end, of course, I would always ask, what's your key takeaways? Because you need to close the session. And yeah, things like that are quite curious. And also things to remember, it's about, so this is the key things I probably learned over the last 10 years. It's about the space. Like a lot of people don't have an hour to reflect on themselves. Us psychologists, man, we can whims lyrically. It's like, oh, enough about me. What do you think about me? But not everybody does. So the fact they have this hour to reflect is precious in itself. Identifying quickly what is the most salient for the client. And it might not be this, like when I'm doing a program and 50 people are sent on this program, and as part of this, I have one-to-one coaching. I had everything from like how I can get the next promotion to how I can have a better relationship with my wife, or how can I agree with my partner if we need to give up our annual opera tickets. So anything can come up, and therefore just allowing for it, if you're comfortable with supervision as well, can be really beneficial. You use the words the client uses. And just back to that point about how would you describe yourself, it allows you to pick the key words they're going to use. Like if they use domineering or loud or talkative or neurotic, you can immediately pick those up. And let's say I struggle to listen, and you can go, well, actually in this assessment, we call this intimate. And you have scored quite low on this, which implies a lot of effort, as you just mentioned. And I find using the same words after you made sure you mean the same thing can be just builds rapport a bit quicker. As Nina previously mentioned, adapting to the personality of the client, especially with the big deltas between you and them. Humor. Like I'm a big fan of Ramdas, and when he says that when you both laugh is the only time you actually see things from the same view perspective, because you're sharing a joke. And never add the client, because the beauty is like I'm never debriefing the client on themselves. I'm debriefing how they came out, their answers on a personality assessment. It's not that I'm talking about them. I never use you or this. I say with personality traits, which you have displayed on this assessment. So I abstracate. I make a distance between the client and the assessment, because that allows us to play. We can play out neuroticism, because it's a trait they have, or high extroversion, high introversion. And, because I'm not playing them. This is personality traits we're talking about on a piece of paper. And that gives a lot of room to play. Like, I think personality can be one of the most funniest things ever. But the word psychometric assessment doesn't exactly sound funny. But only if you're comfortable, of course. And one of the key things that took me ages to learn, be playful with disagreement. Because before, when a client said, I disagree with this, well, I was like, reliability, validity, all of this, but nobody cares apart from some people. But now go, why do you say that? Oh, like person go, I'm really not tough, Nikita. And I go, what does tough mean to you? And go, aggression. Go, well, actually, it means standing your ground on this assessment, what exactly you're doing right now. And so I always do that. I was like, I'm getting the feel of it. So being playful with this rather than being defensive. Because look, if you didn't build a psychometric, and even if you built it, it's up to their interpretation. But if you didn't build it, it's like, it's not your responsibility. You're using the best test for the job, It's not perfect. Nobody is, and nothing is. So you shouldn't defend it. But if a person had a really strong reaction to a two-dimensional word, that might be worth investigating. Any other pointers people want to share?
I'm just curious to know, in what percentage or in what instances would you send the report out to them prior to your feedback meeting?
It depends on the portrait that I use. So if a tool has no negative, no dark side, no overextensions, if it doesn't mention them, and if I'm not brought into a highly political environment, such as if there was a grievance because of which I'm brought in, I would never release any data ahead of the session and ahead of having one-to-ones. But if it's a team development, everything seems to be good, assessments are not contentious, I would send out the reports. Most people won't read it. That's okay. But the person who really wants to read it, who will have a problem if they didn't read it before the session, will. So that's also okay. And most people would be like, how do I access it?
So for example, with my coaching client, who I think is probably highly introverted and did need some reflection time, would you suggest that with a Lumina report, I send her an abbreviated report and then turn up with a fuller one on the day?
Yes, I would send them an abbreviated report and introduction by Stuart Desson from YouTube.
Oh, okay.
And a video explaining what the model is. So, and shortened report, 12, 15 pages max.
Okay.
20 maybe on a stretch.
Oh, brilliant, thanks.
So, and again, always ask the publisher if you want to, maybe your publisher also has videos, just ask them, or an introduction video. They might. It might be on Vivo rather than YouTube. So you might have never known about it, but, or it might be on some other video hosting platform that they thought was a brilliant idea. So, but do ask your publishers if they have an introduction video. Any other thoughts? Or reflections? Right. Well, what questions are you afraid to be asked by your client during the feedback session? Or concerned, or really don't want to, anything? Or puts you on the back foot? Challenging the tool. Would you mind particularly saying why it causes you angst when somebody challenges a product? But yeah, it's not you. It's a product. It's a lens. It's like, you know, if the GPS is wrong or the compass is wrong, it's not your fault necessarily. But it's interesting why they challenge it. All psychometrics are rubbish. Nice. I would ask him, well, why did you complete that one? No, of course. But I would say that, you know, why? Why are you saying this? Is this right? What should I do? Is it okay? At this point, I would ask him, why are you asking me these questions? What would you like to hear? So turn it a little back on them. And if you want to play the psychologist, you can always go, well, it depends. Well, this is a very good point. What will start to change into more of a counseling rather than a coaching session? What would you say makes a difference between the two?
Well, I'd sort of put that down for when people start trying to explore more the past and reasons and events for that. You know, for my coaching, I'm looking to help them go towards the future, and it might be a bit of reflection in the past, but no, really, I don't feel qualified, and I wouldn't want to go too far back into some, you know, deep psychological things that have happened to people in the past. Now, it's just an uncomfortable and probably not an appropriate area for some of us to go into, although some may be qualified and okay to do that.
I see. So that's a very good point, Alex, when you're not comfortable. So would anybody like to offer their advice or what they do when the conversation goes off piste from their perspective?
I mean, I would just say from I literally say that actually that sounds something, you know, really important to you. It's not an area that I feel confident in going further with you, and it would be good for you to find someone to, you know, talk about that, and then make a judgment whether we can now go back to what I thought, you know, what we'd agreed to be there about, or whether they need to go and sort of move more in that direction because it's necessary for them to do that before they move forward.
Martin here again. I'm fortunate enough, Alex, I suppose, because of having a therapeutic background to be okay and comfortable myself. But I'm wondering if your question raises an interesting one about scope. Scope and clarification. And then I'm also wondering, do we need to be as boundaried? Are you actually being unduly boundaried? Because maybe there's something of the whole being starving to come, and if you gave yourself permission for just a bit more, even without the so-called qualification for it, that whole person would come and arrive and go away. But I know also sometimes they can need a boundary and be put back. I think it's a very interesting big topic for another seminar, maybe, Nikita, huh?
And sometimes this is just an escape. They don't want to face the planning, the future, the action. So they find kind of solace into discussing about their past, their problem, their childhood and their adulthood and all those sort of things. So sometimes it is just an escape. It is not actually a real exploration of our understanding, but it is like, you know, you have a wall in front of you, or you have a mountain you don't want to climb. So you're just looking around. Oh, I like nature, being around the, you know, tree and all. It's so, yeah.
Oh, Alex, you're on mute.
I think both of those are very good points, and I think the scoping is important. I think, you know, majority of the coaching sessions that I do are at the bequest of the coachee, and therefore it's their session, and it's for them. It's not for manager. Some people say, "Oh, there's a problem here. Can you try and sort it?" Or it's what their agenda is. So, you know, you have to respect that. And yeah, I think you're right, Marty. If I can go there, you know, safely and constructively, then go there. But, you know, it's just when it potentially pushes a little bit too far that it's just uncomfortable. It's an area to be you know, aware of, I think.
Absolutely. And it's up to you what you feel comfortable with. So for me,
Yes, yeah.
If it goes beyond this, so to me, good definition of coaching is about ego strength. So coaching, if you have somebody with strong ego strengths, you can focus on the future and progress, etc. But you get somebody with low ego strengths, so past trauma or something in the past, which is, you know, keep raising its head again and again. And therefore, this one key thing to be aware of, when this person is telling you this, you might be the first person they ever felt comfortable telling you this. It's this kind of, you know, meeting a stranger on a plane scenario. So for whatever reason, they feel comfortable to tell you something they never told anybody before. So it's just being aware of that possibility. Second, I always ask, do you have somebody to talk to this about this? And quite often they say, yes, I talk to my therapist. So you go, oh, right, they have a therapist, tick. Or no, I never told, or I have a good relationship with my family member, etc. I said, did you ever talk to a professional, consider talking to a professional about this? And they go, well, I thought about this. And I have several therapists, like anxiety specialists, trauma specialists, that I can refer them to. Just like, okay, would you like me to refer you to somebody? Or we talk about employee assistance program, and they might have issues about confidentiality, especially if they're a bit neurotic. So I usually get familiar with the employee assistance program of my company I'm working with. So I can say, no, they're not notified until your 6th session. And so we go, okay, here's a number you can call. are you going to call this? And usually I'd schedule a second call with this person to check if they seek assistance, if I'm concerned. And if I'm really concerned, I raise it with an employer for this individual. But you need to clear this as part of the coaching process, the contract with the employer. What are your thoughts on this, Martin, from a therapeutic perspective? Just checking.
I love the sound of first of all, the care of you calling back and the checking, and also the reassurance that leaves them a sense of safety and containment. I mean, I take a very humanistic lens that a person will sense fairly quickly if we care or not. My own hot buttons around this stuff is when I'm at the receiving end of somebody who I think is too formulaic or too cocky even, or too sure. I mean, sometimes I can like that. Suddenly somebody popped into mind from the Hogan industry who could give me the most amazing cocky experience, and I might enjoy it, but did it really touch my heart? So I don't know.
Beautifully said. Oh, I noticed, Abigail, you have your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Don't know if that's a good thing. I know when I go into coaching, I had an incident when I was actually teaching fitness and somebody tried to sue me. And it was at that point that I felt the legal pressure when I began actually coaching, in the sense of I always make it out clear at the start that I'm not a counsellor, and I'm not trained in any of those aspects. So my coaching style, I have suffered with my mental health myself. So I do relate quite a lot to the emotional barriers that can be put up within coaching. And some of it does really cross over the boundary of a therapist, having been through therapy myself. But it's definitely not something that I think people should shy away from if you know there's tools that you can help them by educating them on. But having that kind of, what's it called, that like agreement between you both that you're only in a certain position that you can help. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And this is, to me, one of the key things about building rapport. I always say in the beginning of the session that we're here to talk about your personality profile and how you describe yourself as part of this development program. So from my side, the great outcome of this session if we can hit the ground running at the team build, if you want to be really specific. But like, you can always ask, what would you like to explore today? But yeah, like if you have a really neurotic client, some of these things will come up because this neuroticism comes from somewhere. You know, if you're really gonna dig, it will pop up. But in most clients, it will be just a normal session, but you need to be aware of this. So for example, 2 months ago, because right now people are going through a lot, we're all in the same storm, but different boats. I felt at the pressure of my wife, actually, who's training to be a therapist, I needed to get clinical supervision, because some of the topics that come up is not only that, can I handle them, but do I have somebody to talk through of how it impacts me? Because, you know, it's also an impact when people tell you this stuff. Some things really impact you because it brings something out of your childhood, for example. Like, I won't go into details. Professional help is being thought. But it also has an impact on you. And in order to have clinical supervision, is not only, am I doing it right, but am I doing all right? Any other thoughts about coaching and therapy and counseling? Just as a last thing, recently I changed tact, because quite often people would say, this is really therapeutic, this is like therapy. And before I was like, this is not therapy. But actually it dawned me, if people think it's therapeutic, it's therapy to them, not me. It's not about me. And if it's therapeutic to them, now I say, well, what's therapeutic about it? You know, oh, I can talk without interruptions. Like, well, yes, because we can structure our thoughts. So rather than saying a boundary, when people reach out to me, no, I go, well, actually, what do you find therapeutic about it? Like, why did you say that? And inviting them rather than saying no, which I did for the 9 years of my career. Whenever somebody said it, it's really funny, you know, when you kind of develop as a professional, you look back and it's like, geez, I really said that. But yeah.
It's the same when you read your papers that you have written like 8 years back, you will say, did I write that piece of shit? Yeah.
That's also can be that. Well, it's reflection and development. Last question. What can we do to help the client make the most of their results, or actually put them to good use?
Me again, in the silence, I don't leave enough space, maybe. Asking them to really take some time with it and to sleep on it and reflect on it, and that second call to come back sometime for some sort of touch base is invaluable, I find, with clients. Sometimes maybe even to journal or write about what's around for them in relation to it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to their partner, share it with their partner, get, if they have one, get some other views, discuss it more, give it time, hold it lightly, throw it in the bin, come back and talk again.
Yeah, indeed. Hopefully recycling. And yeah, it's just what works for them. Like, for example, recently I started doing, like, if a person is highly conscientious, but quite critical of themselves, I'd ask them to print out several performance reviews and highlight positives in one color and development areas in the next, and then write a short summary report on it. And then we can discuss it next session. So I give them a conscientious task that this is a brief. Or if they're really curious, I'll go, well, let's experiment, let's play. Or if they're highly neurotic, well, let's, how would you describe your neurosis? Well, it's my little gremlins. And I was like, oh, brilliant, they're little. So how are we gonna go? What are we gonna say to them next time they pop up? So it really depends on the client and their personality of how we can play with this. Pragmatic application, connect the score's results to their experience, confirm action points, next steps, encourage self-development. I would also say, when you talk about next steps, ask them who can help them. Because we often think of behavioral change as it's all down to me, but it doesn't work that way. Think of when you go to the gym. When you start going to the gym, you don't notice that it's positive effect because you're so used to your old self and your old body. So when you notice little changes, you don't see them. So within a month, you're like thinking, why the hell do I do this to myself? Until somebody unprompted says, you've been going to the gym. And you go, yes, I have. I'm over there again. So when it comes to behavioral change, such as if you want to listen more, if you want to be more empathetic or anything else, I always say, who can help you? Who can be a spotter? So you can come to them and say, look, I want to develop this. Next time I do more, can you please highlight it? And it really works well in teams, especially if you kind of give people spotters, etc. Yeah, and connect the score, confirm action points, next steps. Anything else? Right, that's 10 seconds up. High extrovert. Whenever I say any questions, I count to 10 inside my head. Sometimes you might notice. So asking for key takeaways could help. Identify one thing the client wants to try to do differently. Just one thing. Even if a client comes back with one thing, I want to stop interrupting. I want to interrupt less. Great, that's a fantastic thing. If we made a person's life better by 1% for years to come based on an hour chat, that's a result. We don't need necessarily a transformative experience, or if they listen a bit more, or before next argument, when they feel something not landed, they ask, what did you hear, every third time, rather than jumping on their assumptions. You don't need huge changes. Whenever people say, I help my clients transform their lives, I was like, really? For the better or the worse? And how will it look like? Your motivation, when assistance, and why they want to do this. Is it short-term or long-term beneficial? Talk to close colleagues, manager, and just ask them like a question. What if I had to, which quality I would most benefit from developing in my personality and why? Just asking from their perspective. Well, I'm just really curious, the last question to wrap up. What is the most important thing you've learned about psychometrics in your career? It doesn't need to be necessarily from this session, but just generally. What's like the key takeaways? So if you're using psychometrics now, and you look back to 10 years ago, or whenever you get qualified, what would be the key thing you'd want your young, fresh-faced, well, younger self to know about use of psychometrics? Any words of wisdom? It's not gospel truth, but it's amazing when used effectively. Beautifully put. It's almost like the lighter it's used, the further you can go with it. Can see somebody's typing furiously. People have amazing capacity to change themselves. Absolutely. That can be used in the employability and other skill development more effectively. Don't treat it like a holy grail. But it makes you feel so powerful, so knowledgeable, but really like, be careful of that. Some of the psychometrics have too few questions to make a real impact. Yep. And some have too many questions to make any impact as well. There was actually a practice apparently in the 40s, 50s, and 60s to include items in psychometrics which didn't measure anything, but was supposed to put people of the scent of the items which were. So it was like a really interesting idea of treating your client like that. So we're just going to blow some smoke here. So you kind of detect what we're actually asking you, though it's a self-assessment. Nice. Takes the emotions out of individual differences. Yeah. Personality actually makes things less personal, I find, when used correctly. Would anybody like to add anything else? Just feel free to unmute yourself, or, you know, key takeaways from today's session before we wrap up.
Actually, the most important thing I found, except that, you know, in the process, I see that people, given the space and given the kind of time, people have this amazing capacity to change themselves. Mm-hmm. But the use of psychometrics, the biggest use, the biggest benefit which I derive from psychometrics is that if I tell them something, or if I show them something without those numbers, it will be less acceptable. But if I show them the same thing with numbers, it's more credible. Mm. So if I tell them, like, you know, let's say, you are more likely to kind of be friendly to people than cold or distant. They would kind of, you know, they would say, yeah, it's in some situation, this and that. But if I tell them that, you know, here is, you know, 8 on liveliness, and it implies this, that people who have this kind of score, it's generally implies that. They will say, yeah, this is exactly what I am. So anything told with numbers generates more credibility.
Exactly. It's like whenever people say, who did you show this report to? You know, my husband or my wife. And what did they say? They say, I always told you this. You don't need a psychometric. Like, well, and they go, well, maybe you should listen to your spouse more. So, you know, even that is a practical takeaway from the session. Like, how did that make you feel? It's like, I remember when I completed the psychometric and I called my mentor, and the psychometric showed that my agreeableness, like I have high anger hostility, high agreeableness. And this tool showed that I'm actually really disagreeable who pretends to be agreeable every day. Mm-hmm. And I told her, Wendy, I'm not as agreeable as I thought I was. And she goes, Nikita, I always told you you're a selfish git, but you never listened. So, yeah, exactly. And used a bit lightly, yeah.
And many times it provides even deeper insight into, like, we look at the behavior, we mm-hmm. think that it is because of these and these factors. But then when we have the report, we see that, it could be also because of this and that factor. And then as a hypothesis, we can test it.
Yeah.
So it helps in a proper diagnosis of what to work on, what areas to work on, what things to focus on, and all that.
Yeah, it's something to explore. Mm. Any other reflections or takeaways from today? Or thoughts? Yo, Neil.
Hi, Nikita. I had a quick question, and that was around helping people reframe their own behavior. I was discussing with Joel, and we were talking about sort of perfectionism, and he used to be in the some of his military work was around working with plane engineers and essentially trying to get things fixed as quickly as possible. But at the same time, obviously, plane engineers want to get things right. And he was essentially, you need to get planes up again as quickly as possible. So, you know, we realized that both those things probably load onto conscientiousness. You know, you want to get the planes going again because you know, you want to win the war. But at the same time, obviously, you don't want to send a plane up there that's unsafe. So those kind of two opposite behaviors arguably load to the same traits. So how would you, for example, explore, if you're in a discussion like that, kind of helping people unpick if someone was being too much of a perfectionist, for example?
I would look at the attention to detail, but Stella, go on.
I was wondering if perfectionism is actually more related to neuroticism in a way.
It's
because
both.
You are doubting your attention to detail, basically.
I would definitely use an ability assessment in this case, which would be shown to be effective in high consequence environments, such as I would pick an assessment for that, and I would also look at past performance. It's like this question one time I was helping to select a nanny, and the person says, okay, this is all well and good, Nikita, but is this woman going to run off with my child? And I was like, I think an enhanced criminal records check would be more useful than a psychometric. It's just knowing the boundaries, and it's never alone. So, you know, there's other assessments out there. Like if you're looking for abilities such as attention to detail, I would definitely look at personality, conscientiousness, neuroticism, perfectionism, look out for extreme scores, but I would combine it with an assessment that would look specifically at that ability. And that has been validated in a similar environment. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Neil?
It does. Thank you. Thank you, Stella. Yeah, both all good points.
I think there are actually safety consciousness tests out there, so specifically for those environments.
Excellent. Well, good people, I'm just going to wrap up this session. Then we'll still stay on the call if anybody wants to chat and a cup of tea or get a beer or whatever. But I'm just going to stop the recording. One moment. But thank you, everybody, for participating. And this video will be hopefully up on YouTube in the next few days. Stop recording.